Wait, what do you mean I'm taking over the Franklin account? The words hit me mid-sip of my lukewarm coffee. I looked up from my desk, half expecting someone to say it was a mistake. But the silence was real. Too real. "It's yours now," said Carla. From operations, eyes darting anywhere but mine. "Effective immediately," Mark said, and I quote, "She can handle it." I froze. The Franklin project was a $45 million beast delayed over budget bleeding goodwill. Everyone knew it was cursed. 3 leads had rotated through it in the last 5 months. The latest Tom had just quit without warning. And now it was mine. Not a conversation, not a check-in. Just a quiet reassignment, like I was a spare cog. I hadn't even finished my previous project debrief. I wasn't briefed, consulted, or prepared. "She can handle it." The phrase rang in my ears like a slap. Cold dismissive, like I was a tool convenient and disposable. I stood there blinking at the email notice for several seconds, rereading the words, waiting for the panic to subside. I wanted to march into Mark's office and ask why me. But even as I thought it, I already knew the answer, because I never said no, because I cleaned up other people's messes, because I made it look easy even when it wasn't. Across the hall, Nina, a UX lead with sharp instincts and sharper intuition, caught my eye. She gave a small shake of her head, stood up, and passed by me slowly. As she walked, she leaned in just enough to whisper, "They threw you into the fire. Layla, just don't burn for them." And then she was gone. I sat down staring at the blinking cursor on my screen. My calendar was already being updated. Meetings, added invites flooding in fire after fire, dropped neatly into my lap. All without a word from Mark himself. I swallowed hard. This wasn't a promotion. It wasn't recognition. It was a setup. But they forgot one thing. Fire doesn't just burn, it reveals. The first call went sideways before I could even finish my introduction. "I don't see the updated timeline in this deck." The client snapped. His voice was clipped full of that polished hostility only seasoned executives have mastered. "We already told Tom about this." Twice I swallowed. "Right? That update must have been misrouted when ownership shifted. It's not our job to manage your team's chaos." He cut me off. "We're already behind, and this is costing us real money." That was day 1. By the end of the first week, I'd barely slept. My apartment looked like a storage closet. There were 4 versions of the project tracker, each contradicting the next. No one could tell me which one was official. Every deliverable had a loophole, and every client comment came with a veiled threat. "If this isn't fixed, we'll need to escalate Tom." The former lead had left 0 documentation. 0. He didn't even hand off the shared drive properly. My team overworked half-burnt-out engineers. Barely looked me in the eye. They weren't rude, just defeated. Like soldiers who'd already lost the war. And Mark, not a word. No check-in, no offer of support. No! "Hey Layla, how are you holding up?" I sent him 3 progress summaries. They were all marked. Read none answered. Instead, I got silence and smoke. So I did what I always did. I went to work. I rebuilt the timeline from scratch manually, syncing specs from 8 different folders. I rewrote client responses with a softer edge, even when they were lobbing grenades. I hosted back-to-back late-night syncs with the dev team, ordering dinner, staying online until midnight, listening when they vented. I said thank you more times in 2 weeks than Mark had in a year. One night around 200, I stared at a spreadsheet that refused to calculate properly. Blinking through the glare, I hadn't eaten. My neck ached. The cursor froze, and I almost burst into tears over a formula error. That's when I whispered to myself, "Just save it. Fix it. If I fix it, they'll see. They'll finally see I'm worth more than just cleaning up messes." I wanted that to be true. I needed it to be true. But part of me already knew this wasn't about being seen. It was about being used. And as I reopened my inbox, flooded with red flag emails and half-formed blame, I could already feel the walls tightening. No praise. No plan, just pressure. Just me alone in the fire, still holding the hose, hoping it wouldn't explode. By the end of week 3, the fire was out. I'd managed to deliver the final demo 2 days ahead of the rescheduled timeline. Every bug, every scope gap, every tangled document chain. I closed them all. I didn't just save the Franklin project. I resurrected it. And now, after weeks of crawling through chaos and surviving on caffeine and adrenaline, I was sitting in the back of Conference Room B for the official client debrief. The room was packed. Mark stood at the head of the table, polished and beaming, ready to present the turnaround story like he'd masterminded it himself. A massive screen showed clean visuals graphs with upward trends and keywords like agility, recovery, resilience. The client team looked satisfied, even impressed. Mark cleared his throat. Against all odds, we've brought the Franklin project back on track. This was a group effort, and I'm proud of how we pulled together in a difficult time. He went on to name-check people. Lots of them. A lead developer who only joined in week 2. A sales manager who hadn't attended a single meeting. Even Tom, who quit without finishing documentation, got a backhanded nod for getting us started. But not me. Not once. My name wasn't mentioned. I sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on a spot on the table. My heart was pounding, but not with pride, with something colder, heavier, like someone had taken a spotlight meant for me and turned it off mid-scene. I didn't want applause, not a standing ovation, just a sentence that said, "We saw you." The meeting ended with handshakes and polite claps. People shuffled out chatting about next steps and client dinners. I stayed in my seat, letting the hum of voices fade until it was just white noise. My laptop sat closed in front of me, untouched. Ben Mark's assistant passed by me on his way out. He didn't stop, but he leaned in just enough to whisper, "You did great, but don't expect them to say it out loud." I blinked, my throat tightened. That whisper hurt more than the silence, because it meant I wasn't invisible by accident. I was invisible by design. They knew who pulled this project out of the mud. They just didn't care. I was never meant to be the hero. I was just the janitor. They send in when the floor's too dirty to walk on. I stood slowly. No applause, no eye contact, just an empty room and my own echoing footsteps. But inside something shifted. Not rage, not revenge. Just a quiet kind of breaking. And in that silence, I decided, if they wouldn't say my name, maybe I'd make sure they'd never forget it. The email came at 8:07 a.m. Subject line, compensation adjustment. Notice. I blinked at the header, still half asleep, balancing a mug of coffee in one hand while scrolling through my inbox. I opened it, expecting a routine payroll update, or maybe a delay in reimbursements from the Franklin project. What I got instead stopped me, cold. Dear Layla, due to company-wide restructuring, your salary will be adjusted by 27%, effective immediately. We appreciate your continued contributions during this transitional period. HR department. My hand tightened around the mug. I reread it. Once, twice, a 27%. Pay cut. No meeting. No discussion, no explanation beyond that hollow phrase, restructuring. This wasn't a mistake. It was a message I dropped into the chair at my kitchen table, the coffee forgotten, my laptop screen burning with indifference. The day before, I was the invisible hero who pulled off the impossible. This morning, I was a line item, a liability trimmed in a budget meeting I was never invited to. I saved that damn project. I saved their reputation. I cleaned up someone else's mess with no support, no recognition, and now less pay. My stomach turned. I opened our internal Slack, scanning for any direct message from Mark. Nothing. I checked my calendar. No meeting requests. No follow-up. No let's discuss, no acknowledgement. Just a silent deduction and a digital slap in the face. The room felt colder than it should have. It wasn't even about the money. Not fully. It was the erasure, the disrespect, the quiet way they stripped value from me without the courtesy of a conversation. A thought hit me like a punch. They were waiting. Waiting until I cleaned up their mess. Waiting until the client signed. Waiting until I wasn't useful anymore. And then cut. I stared at the email again. My name looked foreign in the greeting, like it wasn't mine anymore. Just a name they stamped on a notice, not a person who'd kept their entire quarter from collapsing. Then came the wave rage, shame disbelief, all crashing in my chest at once. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I refused. Not for them. Instead, I took a deep breath and whispered, I saved this company, and this is what I get. Silence answered me, a cruel, sterile silence. My phone buzzed with calendar alerts. Back-to-back meetings, same faces, same lies. I didn't cancel them, but something in me had already checked out. This wasn't just a pay cut. It was a line drawn in permanent ink. And deep down I knew. Whatever came next, I wouldn't let it pass unnoticed. It started with a single message, Nina D., Layla G., subject old logs, might be worth a look. No body text. Just a zipped folder and a blinking cursor. I stared at it for a full minute. The subject line was vague. The silence underneath it was louder. Nina wasn't the type to waste time or words, and she definitely wasn't the type to send random files at 9:42 p.m. on a Friday night. Still, I downloaded it, slowly carefully, inside archived project logs. Email exports, audit trails from the Franklin account. Some dating back months before I was ever pulled in. Why I didn't ask, I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a folder marked Approvals Timeline and started skimming through the email chains. At first, nothing jumped out, standard vendor chatter delivery dates, check-ins. But the further I scrolled, the more off it felt. There were multiple references to client approvals that didn't match what I experienced. According to the logs, certain feature requests had been signed off weeks before I ever saw them. But I remembered being blamed for those delays, accused of mismanaging tasks that apparently had already been settled. Something wasn't adding up. And then I saw a forwarded email from our project coordinator to Mark, dated a full 10 days before I was assigned to the account. Should we push back on the deadline? Clients' spec changes are derailing everything. Mark's reply let it ride. We'll shift the narrative when we reposition. Timing will help with internal adjustments. Reposition, shift the narrative. What the hell did that mean? My fingers hovered above the keyboard. I felt it, that cold, prickling awareness, like standing in a room that looks normal until you realize the floor isn't solid. My heart thudded. My skin tightened. They'd let the project burn. On purpose, I kept digging, retracing the audit trail, comparing internal notes with what I remembered. Deadlines were moved quietly. Sign-offs were misstated. Meeting invites were accidentally skipped for key people like me. My mind flashed back to Mark's voice. She can handle it. It wasn't a compliment. It was strategy. I shut the laptop slowly, suddenly aware of how quiet my apartment had become. Outside rain tapped against the windows. Inside, my thoughts thundered. This wasn't incompetence. This was choreography. And I was the centerpiece in a dance I hadn't known I was performing. I looked back at Nina's email. Still no explanation, no follow-up. Just a breadcrumb. She knew she couldn't say it directly, but she'd shown me where to look. Now it was my move, and I didn't plan to blink. I wasn't even looking for it. I was halfway through cross-referencing more approval timestamps when I stumbled into a buried subfolder inside the email log archive Nina had sent. The folder was labeled Internal Only, Do Not Share, a title that practically begged to be opened. Inside were only 4 emails. 4. I clicked on the first one. It was a short message from Mark to the client's operations manager. The subject line, Next Steps, Contingency Narrative. My pulse kicked up. Once the current phase misses its benchmark, we'll trigger the repositioning conversation. Don't intervene. We need it to fail to justify internal shifts. Let's allow it to crash. Then we realign scope. I've got someone who can absorb the blow. She doesn't suspect a thing. I reread the line. She doesn't suspect a thing until the words bled together. They meant me. I was the blow absorber. I was the one they picked to be the fall girl. My vision tunneled. I clicked through the rest. Every email was worse than the last. Backchannel strategies, spec delays crafted on purpose. Notes like, she's reliable. She won't push back. Like I was a tool, a pawn, an expendable firewall they could hide behind. The cursor blinked mockingly in the corner of the screen, like it too was waiting to see what I'd do with this truth. I closed the laptop and dropped my forehead against the table, not from exhaustion, from impact. All this time, I thought I was battling chaos, incompetence, corporate apathy. But this was engineered. They'd set the fire and handed me a leaky hose, told me I was saving the company when I was just part of their cover story. I wanted to scream. Instead, I sat there in silence, letting the betrayal flood me, like ice water in my veins. My chest ached not from anger, but from that brutal ache of being played. The kind of pain that makes you question not just what you did, but who you were while doing it. Then something shifted, not a dramatic snap. No tearful breakdown. Just a slow, deliberate inhale, then an exhale. And when I lifted my head, my eyes were different. Not broken, not bitter, just clear. I wasn't going to yell or beg or plead for someone to explain why they chose me. I already knew. Because I worked too hard. Because I never complained. Because I was easy to betray. But I still had something they didn't know. I had the truth, and if they thought I'd walk away quietly, they hadn't finished reading my story. I didn't tell anyone. Not Nina, not Ben, not even my closest friend. Outside work. I didn't storm into Mark's office, didn't call HR, didn't write a dramatic exit email. I didn't even flinch when I saw his name pop up on my calendar later that afternoon. Instead, I made a list. 3 companies' high-profile prospects. Mark had been pitching for months. I recognized the names instantly. He had mentioned them during team meetings with a grin, called them game changers. I checked our CRM. All 3 were in negotiation stages. No contracts signed yet. Just fragile, high-stakes conversations. Perfect. I created a clean email for each. No subject line, no introduction, no explanation. Just the chain of 4 emails I had found. Forwarded attached. No edits. No commentary. I wanted the truth to speak in its purest, rawest form. Unpolished and unfiltered. Before I hit send, I paused. One last time I read the sentence. She doesn't suspect a thing. It was almost poetic now. Click, click, click. All 3 messages sent. Then I turned to myself. I opened my calendar and began systematically removing my name from every project invite related to Franklin or the new pitches. No one noticed. Not yet. People were so used to me being there, they stopped checking if I still was. I adjusted permissions on our shared drives, stripped my access to technical admin tools, and transferred ownership of folders to silent accounts no one had touched in months. Every digital fingerprint carefully wiped, not as an act of defiance, but as closure. I wasn't planning to explode. I wasn't planning to go out with a bang. My silence was the bang. My absence was the message. I wanted the first question out of everyone's mouth to be, "Where's Layla?" And the second to be, "Why did no one see this coming?" As I worked, a strange calm settled over me. No shaking hands, no racing thoughts, only precision. By the time I logged out of our internal systems, it was close to midnight. Outside the city glowed, oblivious, indifferent, but I felt strangely alive, like I had taken back something that was stolen power. The next morning, I came into the office exactly on time. I nodded to the receptionist, dropped my bag at my desk, and opened my inbox. No explosions, not yet. Just the weight of stillness before a storm breaks. Mark passed by me later that morning, laughing too loudly on his phone. He didn't look my way. He didn't have to. He thought the board was stable, the clients were warming up, he had no idea what had been set in motion. But he would soon, very soon. It started with silence, the kind that doesn't feel empty but expectant, like something was shifting just out of sight. On Monday, the executive team's energy changed. Subtle at first. Tighter smiles, quicker steps. Fewer casual jokes echoing down the hallway. In the morning stand-up, Mark seemed unusually clipped, checking his phone between every sentence. He barely looked up, barely blinked. By Tuesday, I knew why. The first client, Hartford Analytics, sent a one-line email. "Let's pause negotiations indefinitely." That was it. No explanation, no follow-up. I watched the color drain from Mark's face as he read it aloud in the project war room. His jaw tightened, and he muttered something about external alignment issues. No one challenged him. But I saw the exchange of glances between senior team members. The silence had weight now, like people were starting to wonder. By Wednesday, the second client, Viralink, followed suit. "We've decided to pursue other partnerships." Mark didn't say anything this time. He just stood by the window of the conference room for 15 minutes after the call ended, staring out at nothing, one hand clenched behind his back. I sat 3 seats away, pretending to review a budget spreadsheet. But inside I was calm, collected. Every syllable of those emails played back in my mind like a private victory march. And then came Thursday. The final client, Corvus Dynamics, sent a message that would echo in company memory for years. Just 5 words: "We don't deal with liars." Mark dropped his pen. No one moved. Even Ben, usually cool-headed, looked frozen in place. The conference room went still until Jacob, one of our best sales reps, slowly stood up, slid a piece of paper across the table and said, "This is my resignation. Effective immediately." He didn't wait for a response, just walked out. The rest of us sat in that dense, awkward silence for what felt like forever. Mark cleared his throat, opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. For once, the words didn't come. Later that day, while people whispered in corners and tried to piece together what just happened, I sat at my desk, sipping my tea. Same posture, same expression. Calm. But inside something glowed. It wasn't revenge, not the loud, messy kind. This was cleaner, sharper, more satisfying, a kind of justice that didn't need noise, just clarity. They didn't know it was me, at least not yet. But they knew something had happened, something they couldn't control. I closed my laptop gently as the sun began to set through the office windows. The hush of stunned confusion filled the halls like a low hum. And I just sat with it, let it wrap around me like a quiet triumph. Tomorrow, I knew would be worse for them. But for now, I allowed myself a small smile, not for the downfall, but for the truth. And the beautiful, inevitable sound of silence, filling the cracks they never thought would break. The emergency all hands was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. sharp. The subject line, "Business Realignment Update," sounded almost clinical, like someone was cleaning out a filing cabinet, not grappling with a company-wide implosion. But the faces around me told a different story. Tense, pale quiet. I took a seat near the back of the glass-walled conference space, hands folded neatly in my lap. No laptop. No notebook. I wasn't here to take notes. I was here to witness Mark walked in 5 minutes late, which in his world meant panic. His shirt was wrinkled, collar slightly askew, and his usual overconfident stride had given way to something stiffer, more deliberate. He cleared his throat. "Good morning, everyone. I appreciate you all being here on short notice. There's been some unexpected turbulence in our external partnerships." He didn't meet anyone's eyes. His fingers fidgeted with the clicker, though there was no presentation behind him. Just a black screen and his echo. As you know, market conditions have shifted rapidly over the past quarter. Some prospects have changed direction due to external volatility. It's not reflective of the hard work we've done here. People glanced around the room, but no one nodded. No one offered the usual polite affirmations. No raised eyebrows of confusion. Because we all knew. This wasn't about the market. This was about him. About lies. About the kind of rot that festers when power goes unchecked. I saw Nina sitting across the room, back straight, arms loosely crossed. For a moment, her eyes met mine. No smirk, no expression, just a subtle nod. A confirmation. She knew they all did. Mark kept talking, rambling now, spouting corporate buzzwords like pivot and short-term headwinds. But his voice cracked when he mentioned client trust. He said those words like he was choking on them. Someone in the corner coughed loud enough to break the illusion that we were still pretending. I let myself breathe, fully, deeply. For the first time in weeks, my shoulders relaxed, my pulse was steady. I wasn't angry anymore, I didn't need to be, because the collapse was no longer my burden. It was his, and he was unraveling in real time, under the sterile glare of overhead lights and silent stares. By the time he dismissed the meeting, no one applauded. No one even moved, they just watched him leave. And I sat there a moment longer, letting it sink in, not the destruction, the peace, because the truth didn't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes it just needed to wait. The offer came in quietly, just like everything else that had mattered. No fanfare, no urgency. Just a simple subject line in my inbox, "Let's talk future collaboration." It was from Corvus Dynamics, the last of the 3 clients who had pulled out. The same one that had sent Mark reeling with 5 devastating words. "We don't deal with liars." Inside the email was an invitation to discuss a new position, Project Strategy Director. A leadership role, 40% above my current salary, full autonomy. A voice at the table. They didn't ask for references. They didn't ask for proof because they already knew. They had watched what I did, not just what I said. They saw how I navigated sabotage and silence, how I held a collapsing project together with nothing but grit and grace, and they saw me walk through it without breaking. I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling something warm rise in my chest. Not pride, not exactly, something deeper, like breath after a long time underwater. I clicked reply 1 sentence. I'd be honored to discuss. I packed up my desk the following Friday. No farewell party, no send-off email. I didn't need any of that. Mark didn't say a word. He passed me in the hallway once. Eyes darting, lips pressed tight, but he didn't speak. I think he knew. Maybe not all the details, but enough. The truth always has a scent, even when it's silent. As I walked through the lobby, one last time I glanced back. Just once. The building looked the same. Same glass, same clean walls, same sharp angles. But I was different. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking myself to survive. I wasn't silencing instincts or second-guessing my value. I wasn't staying to prove anything to people who had already made up their minds. I was walking towards something better, a place where my name wouldn't be buried in footnotes or whispered in strategy emails. A place where I could lead, not just fix what others broke. I stepped out into the sunlight. A cool breeze brushing past me, as if the universe itself was exhaling with me. Sometimes I thought the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's rising, it's thriving. It's letting your silence turn into a story they'll never forget. Because at the end of the day, the lie collapsed, and the truth stood tall. I gave that company 22 years of my life. I knew the job like the back of my hand. But when the new boss walked in, he didn't see experience. He saw expense. And within weeks, I was out, replaced by the very intern I had mentored. But what they didn't know was, I wasn't done yet. Let me take you back to where it all started. My name is Sarah, and I worked in the finance department of a mid-sized logistics firm just outside of Cincinnati. I started there back when we still did paper invoices and used fax machines. Back then, we were just 12 people, packed into a one-room office with flickering lights and broken coffee machines. I stayed through 3 relocations, 4 CEOs, and more layoffs than I can count. But I never left, because I believed in what we were building. I believed in loyalty. And for over 2 decades, I was the steady pair of hands that kept the books balanced, vendors happy, and cash flow clean. No fancy titles, no corner office, just results. Real ones. The kind that keep companies alive. Then came Lucas. He was the new VP of Operations, freshly imported from some shiny consulting firm in Chicago. MBA. Expensive haircut, skinny tie, full of buzzwords like agile transformation and synergy acceleration. He looked at the company like it was a game of chess, one he intended to win fast, no matter who got knocked off the board. From the moment Lucas walked in, something shifted. He didn't want to understand how things worked. He wanted to reinvent them. And to do that, he needed to make space, cut costs, streamline departments, trim the fat. Apparently, I was part of that fat. But he didn't come for me directly. He smiled in meetings, called me institutional wisdom, asked me to train a new intern, Chloe, a bright, bubbly 23-year-old fresh out of college. She was sweet, curious, eager to learn. I took her under my wing, walked her through every spreadsheet, every process, gave her shortcuts I'd learned over decades. She reminded me of myself, in a way, but I had no idea she would be stepping into my shoes. Just weeks later. It started small. I was no longer CC'd on certain emails. Meeting invites stopped coming in. Lucas started directing Chloe to sit in on client calls. I chalked it up to mentorship. I wanted her to grow. Then came the Friday morning I'll never forget. Lucas called me into his office, smiling that same corporate smile, and said, "Sarah, we're going in a new direction. Your role has been made redundant. This has nothing to do with performance. It's a structural change." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat closed up. My hands trembled. 22 years, gone with one sentence. They offered me a 2-week severance and an HR packet. No handshake, no thank you. And Chloe? She moved into my desk on Monday. Didn't even look me in the eye. Maybe she was told not to. Maybe she felt guilty. Maybe she didn't care. I went home that day numb. Sat in my car for nearly an hour before I could even turn the key. I wasn't just fired. I was erased. Like I never existed. Like none of it had mattered. But here's the thing about underestimating someone like me. You never see the storm coming. Until it's already too late. I wish I could say I bounced back quickly. I didn't. The first few weeks after being let go were a haze. I woke up at 6 a.m. every morning, like clockwork, only to remember I had nowhere to go. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I missed the hum of the office printer, the clatter of keyboards, the morning coffee runs, even the annoying squeak from the chair in the conference room. But most of all, I missed purpose. And that's when the humiliation really sank in. It wasn't just that I'd been fired, it was how it happened. Quietly, without recognition, without gratitude. After 22 years of loyalty, I was disposed of like an outdated file. And Chloe, someone I had poured knowledge and patience into, had stepped into my place without hesitation. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt at first. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe she wasn't given a choice. But when I checked LinkedIn one afternoon, her new title was front and center, finance associate, full-time. And there she was, smiling in a group photo, arms crossed, standing right in front of the whiteboard I used to scribble on during Monday meetings. Worse still, the caption read, "Excited to be part of a forward-thinking team that values fresh ideas and innovation over tradition." That hit harder than the pink slip. And then, I started hearing things. A former colleague, Melissa from accounting, texted me late one night. "You okay? It's a mess over here. Chloe's in over her head. Lucas is losing patience but pretending everything's fine. He's even using your old budgeting template like it's his idea." My stomach turned. That spreadsheet had taken me months to refine. I had used it to save the company from two near cash flow crises. Now Lucas was rebranding it, and Chloe was presenting it, clumsily, to clients I had built relationships with for years, and they were getting frustrated. Another message came in the next week from a long-term vendor. "Did you leave? Haven't heard back from anyone on the new invoice system. Confused who to contact. Hope all is well." I realized something then. They had replaced me on paper, but not in substance. Lucas might have wanted cheap, but cheap doesn't mean capable. And Chloe, bless her heart, wasn't ready for the pressure of quarterly audits, cash projections, or vendor negotiations. She was trying, sure, but she was drowning in a pool she didn't even know she was in. And Lucas, he was too arrogant to admit the cracks were showing. That's when my emotions shifted. The numbness, the sadness, they gave way to something sharper, cleaner, anger. Not the explosive kind, but the kind that simmers, the kind that makes you sit up straighter, think clearer, move smarter. They had underestimated me. I had built relationships in that company that went beyond job titles. I knew every pattern in the cash flow cycle. I understood our clients, what made them stay, what made them leave. I saw things Lucas never bothered to ask about, and now those blind spots were going to cost him. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to argue. I didn't need to, because I still had one thing Lucas never would: credibility. And credibility, in business, is everything. I started making a few quiet phone calls. Nothing dramatic, just friendly catch-ups with people who mattered. Clients, vendors, a retired board member who still had influence. I didn't ask for anything, just reconnected. Reminded them I was still around, still sharp, still someone they could trust. And the more I listened, the more I realized the storm was already coming. Lucas just hadn't looked up yet. It's strange how quiet things can get when you've been cut off from a place you once called your second home. My email account was deactivated, my company badge useless. Even old coworkers were hesitant to reach out. I wasn't just gone. It was as if I'd never existed. It felt personal, too personal. But I didn't wallow, not for long. Instead, I watched. I listened. The updates kept coming, casual mentions from former coworkers, even whispers from clients who had no idea I was no longer with the company. I didn't seek them out. They came naturally. That's what happens when you've spent decades earning trust. People remember. And what I kept hearing wasn't good. Chloe had stepped into my role, but the shoes were far too big. Mistakes on reconciliations, missed follow-ups with key vendors, errors in quarterly projections. The team was covering for her, but they were tired. And Lucas? He was doubling down, pretending everything was under control. He couldn't admit that his cost-saving move was starting to bleed. One of the client managers I used to work closely with reached out in frustration. "Sarah, who's running things over there now? They sent me the wrong invoice twice. It's like they're guessing at numbers." Too disappointing for words. Another vendor emailed me personally, even though I wasn't supposed to be reachable. "Are you still overseeing accounts? Something's off. No one seems to understand how the net terms work." It made me want to scream. How could they be this reckless? But what hit hardest was an old team member, Jenna from payroll, messaging me on LinkedIn one night. "I miss you, Sarah. Things aren't the same. Honestly, they're falling apart. Chloe's overwhelmed and Lucas doesn't care. It's awful." That one hurt. Because despite everything, I didn't hate Chloe. I knew she didn't ask for this. She'd been used, pushed into a role she wasn't trained for by a man who thought experience was overrated and loyalty was irrelevant. Lucas hadn't just replaced me. He had dismantled something that worked and replaced it with smoke and mirrors. And for what? A few dollars saved on a salary line? I began journaling everything I was hearing. I didn't plan to use it, at least not yet. But something told me this wasn't over. The company I gave 22 years to was slowly unraveling, thread by thread. And I wasn't even in the room. The irony? Lucas had built his image on being a savior, the young exec who modernized a stale old system. He gave interviews, shared motivational quotes, even posted a podcast episode titled, "Cutting Costs Without Cutting Corners." What a joke! He had no idea what was really holding things together before he arrived. No clue that corners often hid the people quietly doing the work that made his job easier. And now he was discovering what happened when those people disappeared. Still, I wasn't out for revenge. Not yet. Part of me still hoped maybe someone would reach out. Maybe Lucas would admit he made a mistake. Maybe the company would see the cracks before it was too late. But then, 3 months after I'd been let go, I got a call from someone I never expected to hear from. His name was Carl, a soft-spoken man in his 60s who used to serve on the board years ago. He had since retired, but still held shares and had enough clout to make waves when necessary. He said, "Sarah, I've heard some troubling things. Tell me honestly, is it true Lucas let you go and replaced you with an intern?" I didn't lie. I laid it all out, calmly, factually. No bitterness, just the truth. Carl was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "That's outrageous." He didn't elaborate much after that, just thanked me and said he'd be making some inquiries. I hung up, stunned. Could this actually be the beginning of something? Was someone finally paying attention? I didn't know what Carl would do, but I knew this much. If he was asking questions, others soon would too. And if Lucas thought the worst was behind him, he was in for one hell of a surprise. After I hung up with Carl, I sat there in stunned silence. I hadn't expected anyone to care, let alone someone like him. But he had listened, really listened, and his reaction wasn't lukewarm. It was outrage. That gave me something I hadn't felt in a while. Hope. Still, I didn't count on a miracle. I'd been in the corporate world long enough to know that outrage doesn't always lead to action. But something had shifted. I could feel it. Carl wasn't just a retired board member. He was the kind of man who asked questions when he already suspected the answers. And it wasn't long before the ripples began. A former client, one of our biggest accounts from the Midwest, called me out of the blue. He sounded annoyed, borderline panicked. "Sarah, we've been trying to get answers on last quarter's reconciliation. Nobody's giving us a straight story. You wouldn't happen to be consulting on the side now, would you?" I smiled, almost laughed. Too unbelievable. Just 3 months ago, they kicked me out like a relic of the past. And now their top client was chasing me. We set up a call. Nothing formal, just a friendly review. I walked him through what I would have done had I still been in charge. He took notes, asked if he could loop me in again the following week. 1 call became 3. 3 became 5. I wasn't just back in the game. I was building something new, on my terms. It was empowering, but it was also bittersweet. Part of me still wrestled with the betrayal. Every time I thought of Chloe, sitting at my desk, presenting half-baked spreadsheets I once pored over late at night, I felt a sharp sting of disbelief. How did it come to this? How could someone like Lucas be given so much power and use it so carelessly? But now I had clarity. Lucas hadn't made a strategic decision. He had made an ego move, one based on arrogance, not vision. And Chloe? She was simply collateral damage, set up to fail so he could justify further changes. It made me sick, but anger without action? That wasn't me. So I started moving, not loudly, but deliberately. I reached out to a few old vendor contacts, offered free consultations to some struggling small businesses, and began quietly positioning myself as a trusted advisor in financial operations. The response was overwhelming. Apparently, experience did still matter. One evening, while reviewing an old invoice structure I'd once customized for our biggest client, I got another call, this time from Jenna, the payroll colleague who'd messaged me earlier. Her voice was quiet, cautious. "You didn't hear this from me," she said, "but there was a meeting yesterday, a heated one. Carl was there. He asked very specific questions about you, about the intern, about missing documentation." Lucas turned pale. My heart skipped. Was it finally happening? Then Jenna added something that made my jaw drop. Carl asked for copies of the last 2 quarterly reports, not the ones Lucas polished for presentation. He asked for the raw data. I couldn't believe it. After months of being silenced and replaced, the truth was finally being unearthed. It was too early to celebrate, but I allowed myself a small smile. Because when people like Carl start digging, they don't stop until they hit the bottom. The moment Jenna told me Carl was digging through raw financials, I knew the clock had started ticking. Lucas had built his empire on polished decks and inflated projections, but raw data doesn't lie. And if Carl was smart, and he absolutely was, he'd start to see the patterns I had spent years managing and correcting. The timing, the gaps, the numbers that didn't quite add up unless you understood the business. I didn't need to lift a finger, because Lucas had already sown the seeds of his own downfall. All I had to do was stay ready. Meanwhile, word was spreading. Vendors who hadn't heard from the company in weeks started reaching out to me directly, asking for help with unpaid invoices or lost records. One of them even said, "We used to love working with your team. Now it's chaos over there. What happened?" What happened? Lucas happened. That's what. I started consulting part-time. Quietly, I helped 3 vendors restructure their receivables. One client asked me to audit their books to ensure they weren't being overcharged under the new partnership with Lucas's firm. They were, by over 12%. Too outrageous. I wasn't just rebuilding my reputation, I was reclaiming my identity. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. And that's when the email came. Not from Jenna, not from Carl. From Chloe. The subject line was just one word. Sorry. I opened it, unsure what to expect. Inside, a message that felt equal parts apology and confession. "Sarah, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I have to tell someone. I didn't know Lucas planned to replace you. I thought I was shadowing you to support you. The day they let you go, he told me it was your idea to step down. I only realized the truth later, and by then, it was too late. I'm so sorry. I think I'm in way over my head. I don't know what to do." I sat back in my chair, stunned, so it was a lie. A manipulative one. Lucas had told Chloe I chose to leave, that I had stepped aside. No wonder she hadn't looked me in the eye. She didn't betray me. She was used, just like everyone else. How disgustingly clever of him. But Chloe's message wasn't just an apology. It was an opening. I replied, "I appreciate your honesty. You didn't deserve to be caught in this. Neither did I. If you need help, I'll guide you. But understand this. Lucas's actions have consequences, and they're coming." We arranged a video call. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, her once bubbly tone now flat. She'd been working weekends, trying to stay afloat. Lucas had been micromanaging her, blaming her in meetings when things went wrong, but still propping her up publicly to maintain the illusion of success. What a coward. But during our conversation, she shared something critical. "Lucas told me to use the Q1 smoothing model you left behind. But when I asked him how it worked, he said to just trust the formula." My heart dropped. That model was a forecasting template I'd built, with one key caveat. It only worked when paired with detailed vendor schedules and seasonal cash flow offsets. Without that context, it would create a wildly inaccurate picture of revenue timing. Oh no. If Lucas had used that in an investor report, and then Chloe said it. He used it for the board update. He said it made the numbers look stronger going into Q2. That was it. That was the nail. He hadn't just cut me out. He'd misused a proprietary tool he didn't understand to present a false sense of security to leadership. I hung up, my mind racing. The storm was no longer coming. It was already here. Now, it was just a matter of who would be standing when it passed. By the time Chloe told me about the Q1 smoothing model, I knew the house of cards was seconds from collapse. Lucas had crossed a line he couldn't walk back from, presenting inflated financials based on a tool he didn't understand, to a board that trusted him blindly. And worst of all, he had done it thinking no one would question him. But Carl wasn't just questioning anymore. He was investigating. 2 days later, Jenna messaged me again. Lucas got pulled into a closed-door meeting with the board this morning. It didn't sound friendly. And then came the email I never thought I'd see. Subject: confidential, request for discussion. From Carl. He asked if I'd be willing to walk him through the real structure of the model Lucas had misused. I agreed, but on one condition: that the conversation be transparent, documented, and shared with the board. Carl replied within minutes, "Absolutely. Marti, we need the truth now more than ever." What followed was a 90-minute call that felt like a courtroom testimony. I laid it out, everything, from the dependencies of the forecasting model, to the missing cash flow controls, to the actual year-over-year dips Lucas had buried under optimistic formulas. Carl listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and took notes. When it ended, he said just one thing: "Thank you, Sarah. You may have saved this company." I logged off and stared at my screen in disbelief. Had it really come full circle? The next morning, news broke internally. Lucas was suspended pending a full audit. Chloe forwarded me the memo, and at the bottom was a line that made me audibly gasp. Effective immediately, the board has retained former senior finance advisor Sarah Whitmore as a temporary consultant to assist with reconciliation and recovery efforts. I was speechless. Just 3 months ago, I was shown the door without so much as a goodbye. Now, they were asking me to help clean up the mess. It was too surreal for words. And yet, I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because what came next would define not just me, but the future of everyone who had been caught in Lucas's storm. Walking back into that office felt like stepping into the ghost of a life I'd already buried. Everything looked the same. Same break room, same flickering hallway light. But the energy was different. People greeted me with a mix of surprise and quiet relief. Some even looked hopeful. That part caught me off guard. I wasn't there to take revenge. I was there to restore order. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good to be back on my terms. Lucas, meanwhile, was gone. After the internal audit exposed the extent of his misrepresentations, he was formally terminated. No farewell party, no thank you speech. Just a silent vanishing act. Exactly the kind of exit he had once orchestrated for me. Poetic, really. Chloe resigned a week later. We had one final conversation, this time without guilt or pretense. She thanked me sincerely and said she needed time to figure out who she really was, outside the shadows of people like Lucas. I respected that. She had been used just like the rest of us. My role as a consultant wasn't permanent, but in 3 months, I stabilized what had been broken. I reinstated clean systems, re-established vendor trust, and helped coach the next team of professionals, not interns thrown into the fire, but real hires, properly trained. Then I walked away, this time by choice. No bitterness, just peace. Funny, isn't it? I was once replaced like I didn't matter, and yet when things fell apart, the one thing they needed most was me. Experience, it turns out, doesn't age out. It compounds. I'm now running my own consulting firm, working with clients who value clarity, loyalty, and long-term thinking. The kind of values that don't show up in flashy slides, but keep businesses alive. And to this day, I keep one reminder on my desk, a folded piece of paper that simply reads, "They thought I was gone. I was just getting started." Sometimes the people who get overlooked are the very ones holding everything together. If you've ever been cast aside, underestimated, or replaced without cause, know this: your value isn't defined by a title or a salary. It's defined by your impact, your integrity, and the people who remember you when things fall apart. Have you ever been pushed out unfairly? Or watched someone you respect get replaced by someone cheaper, younger, or more modern? Share your story in the comments. Let's talk about it, because your voice deserves to be heard, and your story might just inspire someone to rise again.